So this was one of the options for the 16 marker questions. So it was to discuss research into the influence of early attachment on adult relationships. So the key word in this question is research. It didn't necessarily want a lot of information about the kind of theory of how early attachment has an impact on adult relationships. It wanted kind of like all of the research that's been done and then an evaluation of that research. So you might have started off with some things about the internal working model, and this was Bowlby that came up with this. So let's just copy this across so we can start talking about it. So Bowlby suggested that quality of a child's first attachment is crucial because internal working model will powerfully affect the nature of future relationships. Because it says research, I'm halting a little bit because normally I would just talk about like the theory and stuff, but because it's research, it wants to know kind of like a piece of research that's been done. So I'm just gonna go straight in to the research rather than, because what people did on the answer was they would start talking about what this template meant. So they'd start talking about if they had a responsive caregiver, this is what they'd be like as an adult. If this happened, then this is what they'd be like. But you don't need to put that because you should be like leading it with research. So McCarthy is a piece of research. So research such as McCarthy policy of adult relationships of women with child and insecure attachments. And women with insecure attachments had less successful adult relationships. While those with insecure, resistant attachments and problems forming numerous supporting the idea of the internal working model. So that's that. So we can get rid of that and that. There's also a little bit about, oh, this is it. So the intergenerational bit. So research shows that internal working models affect also affect the child's ability to parent their own children. Haley studied the attachments of 99 mothers to babies and their own parents. And that's found the majority of women had attachment classification, both to their mothers and their own children. Or the intergenerational transmission of attachment. Let's just read this and see what we've got. Right. And then the only other piece of research that you can refer to is the Hazen and Shaver study. I think I did right actually on someone's answer about putting childhood relationships in, but that's before I realised what the question was. For some reason I thought it just said relationships. I didn't realise it said adult relationships. And so you can ignore my comments if I put that. So from the booklet, which is the Hazen and Shaver study, that I'm just going to add into this bit. Where is it? So Hazen and Shaver also found that not to say you don't need everything that's in the booklet, you can just kind of pick like the essential bits that you need to demonstrate like what happened in the study and then what the findings were in the study to support what you're saying about how the influence of early attachment will affect these adult relationships. So I'm just trying to pick out the kind of like important bits. So far I've got Hayes and Shiv also found that attachment affected later adult relationships by analysing 620 replies to a love quiz printed in an American newspaper. Those classes of secure reported good and longer lasting romantic experiences in their relationships. Avoidant respondents tending to reveal jealousy and fear of intimacy. Early patterns. I got rid of R then and you from a previous video that I did because you're not really supposed to be writing in like second person or referring to like who you, like as if you're writing to an examiner or whatever. Like you shouldn't be writing like that, really. It's not academic. So if you can try and write in third person, that's better. Reflect it in later. I'm going to refer back to that internal working model again in a second. Let's just see what this sounds like so far. Bowlby suggests that the quality of a child's first attachment is crucial because the internal working model will powerfully affect the nature of future relationships as it acts as a template. Research such as McCarthy assessed the quality of adult relationships of 40 women aged 24 to 44 years with childhood insecure attachments and found women with insecure avoidant attachments had less successful adult romantic relationships, while those with insecure resistant attachments had problems forming non-romantic adult friendships, supporting the idea of an internal working model. And the impact of early attachment on adult relationships. The reason why I've just added that on is because in the booklet it was being used to support the internal working model, but we're not using it for that, we're using it to support this question, so you've got to make sure that you link it back to the question. Research shows that internal working models also affect the child's ability to parent their own children. Billy et al. Studied the attachments of 99 mothers to babies and their own parents and found the majority of women had the same attachment classification both to their mothers and their own children. This demonstrates evidence for the intergenerational transmission of attachment. And how early attachments affect adult relationships in terms of we out again because I'm not supposed to be doing it in second person. Hayes and Shaver also found that attachment affected later adult relationships by analysing, oh yeah, we've already just done that one. So attachment reflected in later romantic adult relationships. So I've made sure on the bottom of each of those points that I've linked back to the question. That's really, really crucial and important. And I think that that is probably enough, because on the mark scheme it says Bailey et al., which is about the kind of, you know, the relationships with our children, and then the Hazen and Shavers on there, the internal working models on there with Bowlby, and I've put the extra kind of piece of research in there so that it is a specific piece of research with McCarthy. And then, yeah, I think that's probably enough, to be honest. So then we need to evaluate this research and whether or not this is the case. So we can add in basically anything that can kind of contradict this or support it, or, you know, kind of impacts of it. I'm trying to think actually what we would use. I'm wondering actually if I've done this in a way that is more difficult than it needs to be. Oh yeah, I found it. I've just realised because I had not put it on my slide for some reason. So if you look at in the booklet, it says there's been mixed evidence on the continuity of attachment type. So the internal working models would predict that a secure attachment type in childhood would result in secure adult relationships, but you've got kind of Zimmerman, who assessed infant attachment type and adolescent attachment to parents and found very little relationship between the two, which suggests that maybe that actually isn't the case in terms of this internal working model. So I'll edit that in a second. The other point that you can make is the kind of like deterministic view about these kind of like attachment types, because the suggestion is that if you've not had a very good first attachment, then that means that all your adult relationships are going to be rubbish as well, and that's a bit socially sensitive. And then you can actually then question the methodology of the studies, because if you think of Hazen and Shaver, they use a questionnaire, so we can kind of make quite a few points actually about this. So where the internal working model, is it working model? Yeah, the internal working model can be criticised. So it can be criticised as Zimmerman assessed infant attachment type and adolescent attachment to parents and found very little relationship between the two. This is a problem, as it is the opposite of what would be expected if internal working models were important in development. This theory is not valid at explaining the effect of attachment on adult relationships. Notice there how I've linked it specifically to the question. I didn't just write out what was in the booklet, I've adapted it and changed it. I'm actually just going to put the research into internal working model can be criticised because the question says research. So I am criticising the theory, but I'm criticising the research that has found support for the theory in order to answer the question. I'm really iffy about this question. Normally with a discuss research into something, you would kind of criticise the pieces of research that you've talked about in the AL1 section, but on the mark scheme it doesn't necessarily do that. It just kind of just gives you just general evaluation points about the kind of theory. So an example being implications of findings, e.g. determinism, which is what this next point is, but technically that's not something that you would use about the research, or would you? Because the research is deterministic if it's suggesting that it supports a theory. It's a bit of an odd question, this one, but you know, when you see research questions on other sections, you'll see that the mark schemes are very different to this one. So this is quite a challenging, although maybe it's not a challenging question because they're allowing you to put other points in that you wouldn't necessarily get credit for in other questions. Anyway, let's just go with the point. So I'm just going to... The theory that early attachments influence later relationships can be seen as quite deterministic, as it suggests that children who are insecurely attached during infancy are condemned to experience emotionally unsatisfactory relationships as children. In fact, just to get rid of that bit because we're talking about adults. And only those who are secure, can have relationship success. That's securely attached. Okay. This is fortunately not the case. In fact, it can be found. I'm going to put the point that I put for the other 16 marker video that I did. So about being socially sensitive. So this is socially sensitive, as research has actually found that continuity decreases as individuals progress further into adulthood. And the average person participates in several important friendships and remotely providing opportunities for revising models of self and others. Therefore, the influence of early attachment is less influential on later adult relationships the internal working model suggests. This is supported by Main et al., who emphasised this more optimistic view, finding that some adults who were insecure in their relationships with their parents produced securely attached children. Supporting that they had mentally worked through their unpleasant experiences and adapted their models. Mental models of relationship. Therefore, the internal working model is not as rigid as Bowlby first believed, as they can be changed. Right, and then we've got a final point. So what I'm about to say here is that if you think of that Hazen and Shaver research, they were asking people to retrospectively think about what they were like as children. Now, how on earth are you going to remember what you were like as a child? So what you think that you were like and what you actually were like might be completely different. So Hazen and Shaver's results might be invalid because of that. So it would be better to do a longitudinal study where you put children in a strange situation, saw what attachment type they were then, and then ask them about their adult relationships afterwards and kind of do a longitudinal study in that way. So that would make it a little bit more valid rather than relying on people to kind of self-report, which has its problems in terms of like social desirability bias and stuff like that. You know, you might not want to admit that you're insecurely attached because that means that you're going to be rubbish at adult relationships, according to this theory. So, you know, you might not want to admit to that. Okay. There's another point there about causation as well and correlation, and any kind of like intervening variables like a child's temperament and stuff like that. It's like their personality might have an impact more so than the kind of early attachment. So you can make those points as well if you like. But let me finish this one off. So furthermore, there are methodological issues with research into the influence of early attachment on adult relationships, such as the use of questionnaires to test attachment type, rather than using the better strange situation. This relies on participants' memories and also may lead to social desirability bias, as they may not want to admit they were insecurely attached if it means they are not successful at adult relationships, therefore results into the influence of these early attachments and their effect on adult relationships. Unreliable. Oh no, invalid actually, because they probably, yeah, I'll go with invalid. I was just thinking about reliability then, because I was thinking about how if you were to ask that person to fill it in and it was based on retrospective data, so things in the past, they might remember it differently if they were to do it again, so then that would be a reliability issue. But because I've also talked about social desirability bias, that's about validity, because you're giving an answer that's not correct and you probably give that answer every time and be consistent about it. So that's why I changed it to invalid, because also the retrospective data point would still fit for validity. So that's why I changed that. So there you go. There are kind of 3 points there, which would get you, enough marks in the exam for a 16 marker. So I think actually what I might do is just highlight it for you, just to show like what the point is and things, like it's on the other video. So that's kind of like the point and the evidence. This bit's the explanation. Oh, it's a rubbish colour. And then this bit's the link back. So it's only very short. It just gives you a little bit of an idea of what it means by these different parts of the peel. This one's a bit iffy actually, because so this is an example of one where it's not really in peel, but it's still an evaluation that's effective, because what I've done there is I've kind of made a point about it being deterministic, but then I've kind of gone further and said that makes it socially sensitive. So I suppose that's my explanation bit though, really. So that would be the kind of blue bit. And this bit would be the brown bit. So that bit actually is the orange bit. See, what I've done here is I've put my evidence at the end, because it just like flows better like this, because I'm kind of mentioned that it's deterministic. This means it's socially sensitive, and then this is also supported by some evidence. If I'd have put my evidence in sooner, yeah, I think it needs to be in that order really. And then I've kind of gone on, this is more kind of like explanation bit here. So there are different ways that you can, that's the blue bit, that you can kind of structure it. It doesn't have to be in peel, but peel is a good technique to kind of make sure that you are effectively evaluating, because otherwise you'll get kind of like limited or basic, and then you can't get into the kind of like the top bands. Just to give you an example, if it says any discussion is of limited effectiveness, the highest mark you can get is 8 out of 16. So a lot of you are kind of capped because the discussion was limited. It wasn't, because the next band says discussion is mostly effective, which means that most of your points are in full peel. So if they're not in full peel, then you can't get more than 8 out of 16. So even though you might have got, you know, full AO1, so that'd be like 6, then you're only actually getting 2 marks for your evaluation if you've not got like most of it in full peel. So it's something to bear in mind, really. So there you go.